Following the fletching retiering update and the combat updates, it's time for me to update my era guide for 2026. Let's get started. I promised I'll cover ammo consumption in this guide, so let's start there. The way ammo consumption works is that every time you use an ability, your ammunition has a 15% chance to break. In other words, there's an 85% chance your ammo survives. When your ammo doesn't break, it will drop underneath your target and you have to manually pick it up. However, if the 15% break chance does occur and you're wearing the Master Ranged Cape perk, there's an additional 10% chance that the ammo is saved instead of being destroyed. If you've completed the Animal Magnetism quest and have the Avas devices, any recoverable ammo that lands on the ground will be picked up automatically for you. There are some exceptions. Special ammunition like chinchambas, hand cannon, and bolt racks never drops on the ground, but if the break chance does proc, they would just disappear. There are also a few quirks with how ammo consumption works. Many ranged abilities hits multiple times, but not every hit consumes additional ammunition. Whether an ability uses more than one arrow depends on how the ability is designed. To demonstrate this, I logged into free-to-play worlds so I can disable Ava's devices and clearly see every arrow that are dropped on the ground. For example, Piercing Shot drops 2 arrows, Snapshot drops 2 arrows, Ricochet can hit 3 times but only drops 1 arrow, Deadshot can hit multiple times but also only drops 1 arrow, Bombardment can hit every target in range, yet I only drop 1 arrow. Then there's Rapid Fire, which fires 8 shots and drops all 8 arrows on the ground. So why does this happen? My guess is that it comes down to how the abilities are written in the tooltip. For example, abilities like Piercing Shot and Snapshot specifically state that they fire 2 arrows, so they consume 2 arrows. Deadshot, on the other hand, is treated as 1 arrow that hits multiple times, so only consumes a single arrow, even though it hits many times. It's a strange system, but that's simply how ammo consumption currently works. I'm not going to test this with every special attack in the game, but do know that there could be some weird quirks with how much ammo is broken depending on the type of abilities you're using. There are also some very specific rules with how ammo tier and weapon tier is calculated. If you are not aware of this, I've already covered it in depth in this video, so I won't talk about it here. There is the subject of what to do with early game ammo. In the early game, the type of ammo isn't really that important because they don't have any special effects. The best thing to do is ensure the tier of the ammo is the same as the tier of your weapon, though there may be some specific things to think about because, for example, Magic Longbow is actually tier 75 damage and not tier 80. Elder Longbow is tier 80 damage and not tier 90. I plan on making a gearing progression guide in the future, so stay tuned for that. Sorry if this section isn't fully explored. For Endgame Arrows, I want to break down the arrows into 3 different categories. The camp arrows, the arrows that we want to be primarily camping all the time. The switch arrows, arrows that are more suited as switches. And the other arrows, those that don't fit both of these categories. With these categories established, the most important part of every specific target we are targeting are what should our camp arrows be and what should our switch arrows be. Let's start with the most important category, the camp arrows. When deciding what arrows to camp at a certain target, the first question should be, is the target a dragon? If the answer is yes, use Jas Demonbane arrows. These arrows are pretty basic. You will gain 30% extra damage and 20% hit chance on every ability without needing to worry about arrow stacks. The bonuses you get from these arrows are overwhelmingly superior to other choice to even consider any other camp arrows. If the answer is no, let's move on to the next question. Is the target a demon? If the answer is yes, the same situation as Jas Demonbane arrows. Use Jas Demonbane arrows. If the answer is no, then we move on to the next question. Can we poison the target? If the answer is no, then the next question is, Do we have 100% accuracy against the target with full arrows? If the answer is no, use one arrows. Before I go into details about one arrows, let's head back and say the answer is actually yes. Full arrows will increase our damage by 15% at a cost of 10% accuracy, but because we answered question 4 with a yes, this 10% accuracy should not be important. Every attack we do will have its damage boosted by 15%. One arrows is an arrow that will instead build up stacks up to 10. Basic abilities like Piercing Shot gives 2 stacks, and Greater Ricochet gives 7 stacks, so the more hits blast from basic abilities, the more stacks. Once you reach 10 1 stacks, whenever you use a special attack, an enhanced ability, threshold abilities, or an ultimate ability that would directly deal damage to your target, the damage of these abilities will be boosted by 30% and their accuracy will also be boosted by 30% for the next 9 seconds. If you attempt to use one of these abilities when you have less than 10 1 stacks, your 1 stacks will not be consumed and nothing will happen. If you use it at 10 stacks, but the ability is, let's say, Devotion or Reflect, it will do nothing because it doesn't attack the target. I have provided this chart to help you guide you specifically, but to keep it simple, one arrows will only work at the 10th stack on special attacks, threshold abilities, ultimate abilities, and enhanced abilities that deal damage to your target directly. Now, I do find building one arrows to be incredibly annoying because if you're stuck at 8 or 9 stacks, you are kind of forced to use a basic to force the 1 stacks to be consumed. And then you start to question whether full arrows are just much easier and better to use. Now that I've explained the differences between full and one, which one is better? Let's review the next question. Do you have trouble or dislike keeping track of more stacks in your buff bar? If the answer is yes, use full arrows. If your answer is no, then move on to the next question. Are you pre-building and going for GM speed timers? There has been some content where I felt I needed to use one arrows to get the Grandmaster timer I needed, like Seryu and Ambassador. That isn't to say it isn't possible with full arrows. I've gotten countless GMs with just full arrows without any pre-building like Carapac. But if you're someone that doesn't mind pre-building, there is no harm in pre-building one arrows to full stacks before starting the fight, like what I did at Ambassador. And since I was doing that one without spinner skip, I also had plenty of time to build one arrows during the spinner phase. The same can be said when I was trying to go for 4-cat flight skip as well. So if you answered yes to this question, the answer I'm about to give you isn't going to be a direct answer. If you are pre-building, there is definitely no harm in building one arrows. If you have time to build one arrows during the boss fight, use one arrows and switch to full arrows once the one arrows are fully consumed. So to answer this question, if you can find your opportunities to fit in one arrows, use one and then switch to full afterwards. Otherwise, use full arrows. Now let's take a step back to an earlier question. Can we poison the target? If the answer is yes, then we ask, does the target have enough health to build close to 150 big arrow stacks? Big arrows applies extra 3% poison damage per stack up to a maximum of 150 stacks, so basically 450% extra poison damage. The answer to this question may vary based on how fast you kill the boss. At the end game, there are 2 types of content where I still find big arrows superior: soloing Solak and high in range Archgleeker, where the boss fight lasts more than 4 minutes, and there won't be some annoying boss mechanics that makes you not attack the boss for a long time. Especially with the introduction of Masteric Range with the Equilibrium perk and Ring of Retribution, combine that with Kurum's Instant Sticks, Weapon Poison Plus Plus, Dreadnips, and Cinderbanes, big arrows still have its use. So if the answer is no, then we go to this question. If the answer is yes, use Bik arrows. With the camp arrows established, choose your camp arrow and that'll be your main arrow you'll use the most at your targets. As the category name suggests, this is about arrows you would switch to in combat. The most recommended one to switch to is Deathspore arrows. How does it work? With Deathspores equipped, every hit slot will add a Deathspore stack, so one greater ricochet hit 7 times adds 7 Deathspore stacks. Both the Last Guardian procs also add stacks. Once you reach 12 stacks, for the next 9 seconds, your next ability that costs adrenaline will not consume any adrenaline. If you don't use this ability that consumes adrenaline within the next 9 seconds, then you lose the effect. The most ideal way to use Death Spores is to consume it on Death Swiftness that normally costs 100% adrenaline, so a free relentless perk basically. When's the best time to build stacks? Ideally, once your swiftness is almost off cooldown, you want to start thinking about building Deathspore stacks by switching to it and get 12 stacks. Here is how I do it. If I notice my Death Swiftness is less than 15 seconds from being off cooldown, I look at my adrenaline bar. If I have very low adrenaline, like less than 50%, I switch to Death Spores and slowly build using only piercing shot and basic attack until I reach 100%. If I'm close to 100%, I wait a little bit longer until swiftness is less than 9 seconds cooldown. Then I switch to Death Spores and start using a greater ricochet to quickly build the Death Spores fast. The timing of this takes a lot of practice and getting used to, so it's okay if you don't get it the first time. Some of the timing may be dependent on how the boss faces and its mechanics, which can interfere with this method. Blackstone arrows. If you don't have 100% accuracy at a boss, including the extra 3% accuracy from Essence of Finality, then you use these arrows to weaken the boss's defense. This was very helpful when I was doing a mascot, which allowed me to simply use full arrows throughout the fight. I usually do it at the beginning of the boss fight. They last for 12 minutes, so be sure to reapply them if the boss fight drags on for more than 12 minutes. Keep in mind there are some bosses like Virago that does reset its stack counter throughout the fight, but you can use them at phase 10 hard mode Virago, for example. You don't want to be equipping these arrows for too long because they drop your damage to tier 92 or tier 97 with a sharded Bow of the Last Guardian. Last but not least, other arrows. Dying arrows, don't even use them. Use them to make the Elder God arrows. With Primal arrows, if you want to cheap out on using God arrows, these are your cheap arrows to use. That's pretty much all it's for. Splintering arrows. These are like the non-poisonable version of Bik arrows. They stack up to 250 stacks, which will take forever to build up. They apply a punctured bleed stack, which is okay damage, but as the stacks go up, you will soon realize that they don't really compete with full arrows at all. If the boss is poisonable, you might as well just build Bik arrows instead. They are also tier 95 damage, so with Master Bow, you're actually downgrading to tier 95 damage. There are a few use cases for them. If you want to cheap out on using God arrows, you can actually just use Splintering arrows for that purpose, since they are cheap too. In a very niche case but a Mascot phase 5, they apply a bleed that stops the healing on the obelisks. As for boats, the only relevant endgame boats are Bikrimia boats, but boats are in a state where they simply cannot compete with bows in the endgame. But in the early game, Hydrix Bikrimia boats could compete with the Elder God arrows due to the adrenaline boost it provides on top of Imbue Shadow. Onyx Bikrimia boats is also a great source of healing. And that wraps up my guide about endgame ammo. If there's any questions you may have, feel free to ask. If this helped you, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.